So this morning I'm having some thoughts and insights about suffering. And I know that some of these insights or realizations that I have are not the kinds of thoughts or insights that most people have. Because I see how most people think about themselves or talk. And I have those parts in me also. So having a map or an understanding of why you're suffering might be helpful to you. And I'm hesitating because this isn't a mental thing, it's an experiential reality that I'm trying to speak of, so I'm trying to find the right words. It's like part of the problem is the way that you think of yourself, or the way I think of myself. It's this conditioning that we've had since we were born, societally, culturally. It's convenient for us as human beings to identify a separate self. And most people are, almost in a traumatized or numbed kind of way, trapped in that sense of separate self, separate from the universal life force which animates all living things, everything, perhaps even inanimate objects, all of which are you, all of which are you. But you have this habit pattern of separating out a whole bunch of things in your experience which you, in this habit pattern, the pattern is to think of those things as not you. And there's this tiny little thing over here which we fixate on as this is me. And this is just as foolish an activity in some ways as if I were to just take my little finger here and say, that's me. This is me. Look at me. Oh, look, let me dress up and let me put makeup on my finger face, right? This is me. I'm going to worship this, right? Meantime, further down my hand here, maybe I say, well, that's not me. So it doesn't matter if I attack this or burn this or kill this or hurt this, because this is not me. This is me, right? And yet, if we attack this and kill this and burn this, this doesn't feel so good. But we don't realize that we're connected. Perhaps it's very simplistic. But guys, the heart of this is about the pattern of the mind in creating identification in the world. And so part of the Buddha's awakening, or the realization in a lineage like Zen, is the boundary dissolves between what I thought was me and everything. And for most people, that's a little bit of a confusing moment, because everything we've learned has been how to worship and meet the needs of this imagined self. What the hell do you do when everything is you? It's overwhelming. And the suffering is overwhelming. And so and yet in the midst of that, there's a freedom. There's a freedom because life is continually regenerating. And when you experience your identity as everything, it's also continually regenerating, and it's also living and dying constantly. I have an old dog who wants to say hello here. She's not doing so well anymore, huh? Sometimes she can't walk properly anymore. So that's a form of consciousness. So I think the realization this morning that I wanted to share was something about stepping back a little bit more from the fixation of just this is me, and seeing all the endless, unending neediness, right, that constantly surrounds us. Like, here's another form of it right here, right? Someone who's getting old, who doesn't feel good, who can't eat properly, doesn't finish her food anymore, her tail doesn't really wag, her back is getting stiff. For more than a year, I've wondered if she would make it another 3 months. So I've been massaging her regularly. Why? What's the point? We're all going to die. It's just consciousness trying to take care of itself, right? It's me trying to take care of other parts of me. But the parts that need help are endless, right? Extinction rate on our planet, it's overwhelming. So the little separate part of me, what? Can't meet that, can't do that. So what can I do? What I can do is try to help other human beings, you who's watching this, take up practices that enable you to have this more expanded sense of self and consciousness, essentially to have some kind of awakening experience, which is, I was going to say it's just the beginning, but awakening isn't the beginning. There is no beginning. Everything's been happening since forever. So to create a beginning point or an end point or anything like that, there's a kind of arbitrariness to it. But let's say the beginning is when you have the intention, you wake up to the fact that something is not complete in your life. There's this yearning. Maybe that's the beginning. And you're right. If you're not having the experiential realization, which most people are not having, that everything is you, and you're not really struggling with the way that society conventionally makes a sense of self and patriotism and nationalism and all the many ways that we as human beings separate. There's them and there's us. There's me and there's this other. And I'm not saying we don't need that to some degree to function, but it's a little bit like understanding the whole body. Our whole body is us, right? And so yes, sometimes we might focus more on something really tasty, even if it's not that healthy for the rest of our body, because we like the sensations in our mouth. So we prefer one part of our body over other parts. Like maybe it's something that hurts my heart or hurts my joints, like sugar, right? But momentarily it gives me a rush, which is a nice feeling in a different part of my body. So yeah, we play off different parts of ourselves. That will never end. But I think it's different, very different, when you have the realization of yourself as a whole and what helps you as a whole, versus getting stuck in just thinking of some small separate part of who we are. So this realization of that experience, that everything is you, you could say that's an important step on the path. And yet, what do you do with that step? Because this path is a journey of integration of two different worlds. And one is the world of duality and separation. It's who you are as a unique person, which has value and validity, right? It's how things function on this plane, is they do have a unique configuration. And that's precious, and that's a miracle, right? And then there's this integration of this separated part also being connected to everything that exists. And then how do you function? How do you function in that realization? And that's a journey of unfolding spiritual practice. And there's no one answer to that. But there are principles that support that. And this is a lot like, I don't know, if you want to become really healthy or aerobically fit, let's say, there's no one answer of how to do that. There's innumerable ways you could do that. But there's certain principles and functions of that process and the practices you need to take up if you want to maintain that, which are not arbitrary or random. And yes, they might vary, but I mean, for example, here's a general principle. You exercise at least 3 times a week, perhaps for 20 minutes per day to 80 or 90% of your target heart rate for your age. I'm not an expert on sports, so kind of made that up, but it's an example, right? There's a guideline of what millions of people and doctors and so forth have researched and found to be helpful in the experience. Guys, this experience of awakening or having the ability to soften our addicted, contracting, compulsive sense of self, there are practices that also help relax that, right? There are practices that help us have more physical flexibility, right? So what are the practices, if you're interested in stepping a little bit out of this tiny, contracted, addicted, separate sense of self? Well, I can share them with you, but first I have to give a fair warning, right? That many spiritual teachers have given over the years, and that is the heart of going from this addicted separate self to this realization that we're all connected has two primary parts to it. Okay. So the one primary part is a sense of freedom from this addicted separate self here, right? That, wow, this is realized, this becomes spacious, this becomes open. And the other is maybe you don't like that this view has changed, right? This is an example. If you're uncomfortable with the fact that my face is no longer in the picture, you're going to be very, very uncomfortable with awakening. Because awakening doesn't fit our expectations, right? It's a direct realization, this is life, this is what is happening. Can you make your peace with that, right? So in that sense, what's uncomfortable is what I thought to be true, this little addicted separate sense of self, is now something else takes over, right? And just in the nature of that, there's suffering, right? You lost some part of yourself, the part that thought that you were you in some narrow way. You lost that. You can't get that back, really. I mean, you can go back to your addiction. You can start using again those kinds of thoughts, those kinds of habits that make you contract, rigid and polarized in your sense of self. And then maybe you'll feel better. Because living in the vastness of existence without that small self, that poses its own problems. But that's why there's these principles and practices to support that, right? And part of that is community. So this has been a little bit of a meandering talk, and instead I'm going to come back and try and say in a more succinct way the heart of what my insight was this morning.